Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 30 best episodes of Breaking Bad. Now this video is a part of a series of videos I was doing where I covered every single episode of Breaking Bad one season at a time, and this video is sort of the conclusion and celebration of that series where I count down my 30 favorite episodes of Breaking Bad after having just watched the show. So this video is intended as just that, part of that series, a celebration of that. It's mainly for the viewers who stuck with me through those 5 seasons. Of course, anyone's welcome to watch this video, but the caveat on that is I am not going to make this short and succinct for a short attention span audience. This is a celebration of my coverage of Breaking Bad, so in that case I'm going to blather on for as ever long as I feel like it, and if that's not what you're in for, that's not your kind of thing, you don't want to listen to some moron blathering about Breaking Bad for an hour and a half, then that's okay. You can just not watch this video. I actually have another video that is shorter and succinct about my top 10 favorite episodes of Breaking Bad, so I suggest you watch that one instead. This one is about, just sort of me blathering on for as ever long as I damn well feel like about my 30 favorite episodes of Breaking Bad. So, this is a tradition on my channel. I've covered a lot of shows now where I cover every episode one season at a time. I've done all the Star Trek shows except for the original series, which I will get around to eventually. I've done Lost. I've done Babylon 5, BoJack Horseman. I think that's about it. I'm working on The Outer Limits at the moment, but I haven't finished that. And so, it's tradition with all those shows. I would do a best list and a worst list. Count down my top whatever favorite episodes and the top whatever worst episodes. But for Breaking Bad, I decided not to do a worst episode list. Instead, I made like a different video instead. And the reason why, and I talked about this before, is that there would be really no reason for me to do a worst list because there's not that many bad episodes of Breaking Bad. There's just a lot of sort of mediocre, maybe somewhat boring episodes. But it didn't seem to make sense to have a list consisting of mostly just episodes that are okay or just kind of mediocre or whatever. With the exception of one episode, there is one episode which I do think is the clear worst episode of Breaking Bad, and that is a terrible episode. The only terrible episode of the show, mind you. And I talked about this episode a lot in my Season 3 review, and it's called The Fly. Some people may expect this to be on my best list because it is, to my ever, puzzlement, is one of the great mysteries of the universe, in my opinion, that some people actually consider this one of the best episodes of the show, when I think it's very clearly, very clear, nothing else even comes remotely close to being the worst episode of the show. Now, if you want more of an explanation for that, you can check out my Season 3 episode by episode review, and I actually did like a half-hour segment. In fact, one of these days I'm going to do a video just devoted to that one episode and why I so heavily disagree with people who actually think it's one of the better episodes of Breaking Bad. I think it's very clearly one of the worst, and I've heard their arguments about how it's a character story and how it really develops Jesse, and I completely, utterly disagree with those arguments wholeheartedly. And so one of these days I will make an episode where I'm dissecting that and getting deeper into my reasonings, although I did get pretty deep in my Season 3 review. So again, if you want a deeper explanation for that, then check out my Season 3 review. But other than that, I'm not doing a worst list because Breaking Bad is one of the best shows, if not the best show, to ever air on television. So I'm just going to focus on the best episodes. Now, I talked before in all my reviews about how I think the show got progressively better, that Season 2 was better than Season 1, Season 3 was better than Season 2, Season 4 was better than Season 3, Season 5 is frankly the best season of television of all time. In my opinion, I think there's no season ever in any show, be it The Expanse, Game of Thrones, Star Trek, whatever you want to think of. I think this is the singular best season of television that ever existed. And I talked about that a lot in my season 5 review. So, that being said, you will find, and this does make this sort of countdown a bit dull and maybe seem a bit repetitive, but I gotta stay true to what I think are my favorite episodes of the show. You'll find that most of this countdown consists of season 5 and season 4 episodes, especially season 5. In fact, I got some statistics here. So, season 1, there are 2 episodes in my countdown. Season 2, there are 3 episodes. Season 3, there are 4 episodes. Season 4, there are 7 episodes. And season 5, there are 13 episodes in my top 30 list. So, to put that in perspective, there are 16 episodes in season 5. So there's only 3 episodes of season 5 that did not make my top 30 list. And another way to put this in perspective is this top 30, and 20 of those 30s, 2/3 of this countdown consists of season 5 and season 4 episodes. And also, another way to put this, 43% of this countdown is from season 5. So nearly half. As I said, I just think of season 5 that highly. So, and also just this little spoiler, so you're not that shocked. This countdown, I did in fact include El Camino in this countdown, even though technically it was not part of the show Breaking Bad. It was a movie epilogue that took place after. I think it should be included in the story, so I included it in this countdown. My rights to do so because it's my video. Anyway, so the other thing I was going to mention is I give every episode a rating between 1 and 10. And so I take the highest of those ratings, of course, and put it and make my top 30 best list. Now, a lot of times, as I said, I've done this before for many other shows. And the majority of those shows, like the top 30 or top 50, depending, sometimes I do a top 50 or more if this show has more episodes. Something like Star Trek Next Generation has 176 episodes. Where Breaking Bad, I didn't find the exact figure, but it's around 80 or something. So it's a lot less, almost less than half. So for shows like that, I do like top 50 or whatever. But for most of those shows, like, they will include like 7 rated episodes, 8 rated episodes, 9 rated episodes, and 10 rated episodes. Whereas for Breaking Bad, they're all 9s and 10s, which means I have a lot more 9s and 10s, comparatively speaking, even to much other shows. So it just, again, showcases how highly I love the show. Now, to be fair, there was one other countdown I did that also was comprised of all 9s and 10s, and that was BoJack Horseman. But in the case of BoJack Horseman, I used all of the 9s, whereas in the case of Breaking Bad, I had to leave out some 9s. And also, in the case of BoJack Horseman, the majority of that countdown were 9s, and then the minority were 10s. Where here, in this Breaking Bad countdown, the majority are actually 10s, and 9 are in the minority. So, again, it just showcases how much I freaking love this show. Anyway, enough of the preamble. As normal, I start with like a card that has my rating, and then I'll get into the episodes, and when I get to a different rating, I'll have the card. So, I'm going to start with that. Alright, so go ahead and start the countdown. Of course, we're starting with my 9 rated episodes, and we'll start with my number 30, which is I See You, which is, I get the wordplay because of BoJack Horseman. Pointed out, I See You can mean the intensive care unit, but it's actually spelled like out, see you. Anyway, So this is the episode that takes place after the Hank is attacked by the evil cousins, and it deals with the aftermath. And I found this a very strong character story, which of course is a very common theme you'll find with Breaking Bad. Is all consists of very strong character stories, but this dealt with sort of Walt coming to terms with that Hank almost died, and that was directly related to his sort of activities, and how he's starting to realize that these two men were actually sent to kill him, and he's starting to become aware that Gus actually helped protect him and helped protect Hank. And of course, I think he is also aware that Gus is doing this out of self-interest. It's not because he likes Hank and likes him so much. In fact, Walt isn't even aware that there's actually a much greater plan in play, that this is all part of a plot to distance himself and get revenge on the cartels. A storyline that will evolve throughout the season and into season 4. So, yeah, so I found a really strong character piece, particularly the scene where Gus does go and visit the hospital, and he's acting, of course, all in character about, oh, I'll do anything to help the police, and Walt's like freaking out and trying to, and pleading for Gus for, I think he called Gus repeatedly and it was ignored, and he's pleading with Gus for any information, and Gus is just, getting annoyed with him because he's kind of breaking his character or breaking his cover a bit. And so Gus is just like, look, I hadn't played side just like you, and I'm sure, blah, blah, blah. And he says it, and it's a really great scene. It really shows like the kind of evil dynamic character that Gus is, and it starts to show the sort of unraveling of Walt, and how unraveled he was by the fact that Hank almost died. It shows how important Hank is to Walt, which is another really important nugget of information for the show going forward. So overall, yeah, I thought this was a pretty great episode. So we'll get into my number 29 on my list, which is Box Cutter. This is the season premiere episode of season 4. Now, I talked about this before, how I felt like this was a great episode, but then season 4 got kind of dull and really spinning its wheels right up until it got to the ending, which was amazing, and you'll find a lot more episodes from that ending on this countdown. But this was a great sort of follow-up to the end of season 3, where you see that Jesse had to kill Gale, and they confirm, in fact, what you pretty much already knew, that Jesse did in fact kill Gale. And he's sort of in shell shock over that, and throughout this episode. In fact, season 4 overall deals with how sort of the PTSD that has affected him over killing a man, because that's Jesse's character. Jesse's actually, I think, sort of the most moral and upstanding character in the entire show, and killing someone like that in cold blood, especially someone who didn't deserve it and someone who's begging for his life, is something that really affected him, and something he really did not want to do, that he kind of just had to, because his own life and Walt's life depended on it, that had he not done that they both would have got killed. And you get the standoff with Gus realizing that Gale's dead, because, as I said, like, Walt and everything is all part of Gus's master plan to get back at the cartels, but it hinges on having someone who's able to create this great meth. And now that Gale's dead, he does need Walt and Jesse, and he's starting to realize that. And so there's nothing he can do about it, but of course he's pissed as all fuck at Walt. So he has, but Walt is like, he knows that was his best chance, and he's pretty sure that plan worked, but of course he's not 100% sure that Gus is just gonna cut his losses and just start from scratch. I mean, he pretty much knows that would cost Gus a lot of money, and that would ruin his plan. But you can never be too sure, especially with a sort of evil criminal like Guss, that sometimes it could be unpredictable. So Walt does start to freak out and tries to convince Guss, like, look, you need me, blah, blah, blah. And Guss is being very silent, not even responding. And this is the very, very classic scene. It's classic for a reason, where Guss gets out the box cutter. And he very calmly dresses and puts on these overalls so he won't get dirty, and like hangs up his suit jacket, and then gets out the box cutter, and everyone, including Walt and Jesse, thinks that he's going to kill them. But instead, he kills his own goon, because first of all, the goon was seen at the scene of the crime where Jesse killed Gale. And also the goon was suggesting that he could cook instead of Walt and Jesse, and Guss knew, of course, that he couldn't, so he was being arrogant. So he just slit the dude's throat right in front of them, and then just very calmly put his overalls back and put his suit back on. And it was just like, told Walt, hey, clean up this mess, and you got work to do, and then calmly leave. It was just such a powerful scene. And then, of course, the rest of the episode deals with the aftermath, and it has that dinner scene, or was it breakfast, whatever meal it was, at the diner with Walt and Jesse, sort of should really showcase the difference in these two characters, and particularly the different state of minds they were in after just experiencing what they experienced. Because Walt is just, he's just, gears are turning. He's like, my life is still in danger. I still need to come up with a plan to get this. We still need to get back with Guss. We need to kill Guss. We need to figure out some way out of it. Where Jesse had kind of resigned himself, especially after, the PTSD of having killed someone, that he became a lot more lethargic and apathetic, and being like, oh, who cares if Guss kills us, we're fucked anyway, everything's fucked, nothing makes a difference, and there's no point in doing anything. And it was really great seeing that dynamic. So yeah, this was a really great episode too. So next, we'll get into my number 28, which is Live Free or Die. This is a fun episode where you get the magnets, bitch. Where first of all, because this is the premiere episode of season 5, so Walt has to convince Mike not to kill him, and then further that he needs that Mike should work with them to try to prevent Guss's laptop coming to possession of the police, because it has all the footage of Walt and Jesse cooking, and Mike was there too, so it incriminated all of them. And so they had to come up with this weird plan with the junkyard guy to use a giant magnet to destroy the laptop. And I love how, like, I love the interaction between Mike and Walt. That was probably the best thing about the first half of season 5, and this really showcases that a lot, particularly the scene where you have Mike and Walt like arguing over what to do with the computer, where Mike is like, there's no way, just forget about it, we should just leave, and Walt's like, there's gotta be a way, and the whole time Jesse's like, what about magnets? Why don't we use magnets? No one's listening to him, and he finally has to say, hey, how about magnets, bitch? Oh my god. Anyway, I think I misquoted the line. It's not magnets, bitch, and a lot of people misquoted, and I pointed this out in my review. The actual line is, yeah, bitch, magnets. But anyway, part of the reason why this episode makes it into my countdown, though, actually has to do with the fact that the opening scene. And I love this opening scene to death, especially in this placement of this episode, because this is sort of, as a viewer, you just got done watching the whole conflict between Walt and Guss, which was super, super intense. And this episode, when it first begins in the proper time period, deals with the aftermath of that, and the whole thing with Skylar starting to be terrified of Walt, and Walt having to deal with the aftermath. So you're not really thinking ahead, but it starts off with this it really teases the brain, where it shows you this future where Walt is desolate, and he's obviously sick, and he has hair, so he's given up on his chemo, and he goes to a Denny's, and he's all alone, and nobody knows who he is. And so it's obvious that his whole empire and his whole thing and his whole intentions is falling apart, and he's not in a good place. And he buys this like military grade machine gun from that arms dealer dude we've seen before. And he has a license plate from New Hampshire, hence the name of the episode, Live Free or Die, because that's the motto of the New Hampshire's license plate. And then the title credits come on, and we get nothing more of this. Until 8 episodes later, where they give us another tease, and then they hold us back all the way to like the penultimate episode of the finale, when it all starts to come back together. I love this foreshadowing. I love it even more from the fact that the writers themselves didn't know exactly where this was going, that they stated they purposely didn't lay out a plan, but obviously by creating the scene, they created something to build towards. I fucking love it so much. So I think this does elevate this episode a lot for me. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get into the next episode on my list, which is number 27, A Rabid Dog. Now, this is going towards the end of season 5. This is after sort of Jesse has figured out that Walt tried to do. He was the one who poisoned Brock, and Jesse got crazy and tried to. The episode to this previous ended with Jesse pouring gasoline all over Walt's house. Now, I did say I was split. Part of me really likes, and part of me was kind of annoyed how this episode was structured, because the previous episode ended with Jesse pouring gasoline all over Walt's house, and this episode begins only from Walt's perspective, where Walt goes over to his house and finds it smelling of gasoline, but Jesse's not there, so he assumed Jesse changed his mind, so he goes out of his way to try to hide the smell, and Skyler, of course, sees through his bullshit, and so he has to tell the truth about what Jesse was doing. He's like, oh, he's just a confused man, but Skyler's like, well, you gotta kill him, which is quite powerful coming from her, but she's only on the mindset we need to protect his family. In fact, even like Saul even says like, well, maybe it's an old Yeller situation, hence the name of the episode, suggesting that Walt needs to kill Jesse, and Walt is very, very resistant of this idea, and of course it showcases the kind of man Walt is and how he thinks of Jesse as another son, but Jesse is not aware of this. Jesse thinks of Walt actually a lot poorer than he actually is. He does think that Walt is this evil man. But then, of course, you get Jesse's perspective like 20 minutes through the episode and find out he didn't simply change his mind, that Hank showed up because Hank was following him, and then Hank he was the one who stopped Jesse from burning down Walt's house and said there's a better way to burn him down, and that's by getting him arrested and building a case against him. And so this is the episode when Jesse starts to work with Hank, and then Hank sort of shows his true colors by purposely putting Jesse's life in danger, saying that he doesn't give a fuck about Jesse's life, that all he wants to do is catch Walt. And to me, that really showcases how Hank is not the hero of the show. Hank is actually just as bad as the guy of Walt. He's just coming at it from the angle of law enforcement as opposed to the angle of drug dealers, but he's basically, Walt and Hank are two sides of the same coin, in my opinion. That he's no more moral than Walt is. Especially now he's letting his obsession get the better of him and just wanting to do whatever it takes to have Walt arrested. And then you get this scene towards the end of the episode, which I love because it shows, this is how I describe season 5 as sort of Shakespearean tragedy, and I think it all hinges on this episode. Because Shakespearean tragedies in general, they mostly have to do with misunderstandings. Like, things happen and tragedy happens, a lot of tragic events happen, people die, all because people don't communicate with each other properly, and there's a miscommunication, and people do the wrong thing because they feel the situation is something that it's actually not, or they think someone's behaving in a way that they're actually not. And that's exactly what happens here in this episode, because Walt just wants to reach out to Jesse. He is actually refusing all the suggestions of people telling him to kill Jesse. He does not want to do it. He wants to talk Jesse out of it. He wants to reason with him. He wants the best for Jesse. He just wants to send him off on his way and for him to have a good life. But Jesse just thinks that Walt wants to kill him. Jesse's like convinced that Walt is an evil man who's going to try to kill him any chance he gets. So they go to this meeting where Walt generally wants to try to talk him down and help him. Well, help himself. But, you know, you can't say Walt doesn't have any selfish motivations. He most certainly does. But at least he's very rejective of the suggestion of killing Jesse. But Jesse, on the other hand, thinks just Walt's an evil guy who's going to try to ambush and kill him. In fact, Hank even thinks the same thing, that Walt's going to try to kill Jesse at this meeting, and how Jesse sees this like scary looking muscular dude standing by Walt, and so he assumes he's there to kill him, and he's like, "Nice try, asshole." But it turns out that's just a random father waiting for his daughter to show up. And I love that so much, because it shows how, you know, they never judge a book by its cover. You always have the misconceptions where you see this guy, you think he's an evil or muscular dude that's going to kill you, but it's just a father living his life waiting for his daughter. I love that so much. Anyway, also, so Jesse calls up Walt and is like, "Nice try, asshole," and blah blah, and so he ruins Hank's whole plan. So he's pissed off, but we find out that Jesse is coming up with this other plan, and Walt, because of this, realized that Jesse's a lost cause and he can't be talked to, and so he reluctantly calls what's his face, Todd, to get his uncle to kill Jesse. And so everything spirals down worse in the next couple episodes, which will be much higher on this list, because even though I love this episode, I think it was a great setup for this tragedy. As I talked about, it does drag a little bit, and sometimes it can be a little boring towards the start. It has to say, I was a bit split on them like waiting 20 minutes to show Jesse's perspective. That's something you like kind of wanted to see right away. But anyway, still really great episode. Still like it. So we'll get into the next episode on my list, number 26, which is the pilot episode, just called Pilot. Finally getting back to season 1. I still think that this is one of the best pilot episodes ever. Now, I think pilot episodes typically, I think, are not as good. They're never, in my opinion, one of the best of the show. In fact, I think this is a rare example where it makes my top countdown. Even Lost, a lot of people like rave over Lost pilot, but honestly, I was never hooked by it. I mean, it looks great visually, but storytelling wise or character wise, I think it's actually kind of poor, and they got much better as the show went on. With Breaking Bad, this, to me, when I saw the pilot episode of this show, my first thought was, this could be a movie. Like, you don't even need to show anything after that. Like, this could serve as its own theatrical, in theaters film. Start to finish, it ends exactly how it ends. Well, maybe with less of a cliffhanger, maybe a bit more of a definitive ending, but still, like, this could be its own thing. And that's what makes it the best, or one of the best pilot episodes in my opinion, because most pilot episodes are, especially I think of like Next Generation and Counter Farpoint or something like that, most pilot episodes are like, ooh, look at these characters, here are the characters, here's what they're going to be doing, and it's like they're being way too obvious of trying to introduce you into things, whereas this episode, I think, exists in its own right, but it also serves the purpose of introducing you into the story, introducing you into Walt and who he is. But the story could stand completely on its own. As I said, I think this could be its own film without anything that coming after it. So yeah, and I think it was the perfect introduction. It has Walt going right along with Hank, and he starts to get the idea of the meth because he finds out he has cancer, and he's hiding it from everyone because he can't afford the treatments, and he will have no money to give to his family if he does, and so he hooks up with this old high school student Jesse, who was one of the people at the crime scene, and they start cooking meth, but they run into problems with the associates that try to kill him, and they have this thing in conflict in the desert. So yeah, I think it's pretty self-contained, amazing introduction to the show. So next we get into number 25 on my list, which is an episode called Bug from season 4. So in this episode, basically Walt is still sort of cooking meth and dealing with the threat of Guss, whereas Guss has better things on his mind because he's dealing with the cartel, who are actively shooting his men. In fact, we get a scene where with Jesse, who's now working with Mike and part of Guss's security forces, while they're moving some of Guss's product. Cartel snipers start shooting and killing Guss's men at random, and Jesse almost dies, but Mike saves his life, and then Guss just walks out in the middle and is like enough, and makes himself a target, and of course they don't kill Guss because they need Guss alive. And so in the earlier episode, Guss tried to negotiate with the cartel, but the cartel just laughed in his face and simply says, non-negotiation. There's a simple question the cartel's asking you, yes or no. Basically, are you going to cooperate and do what we want? Yes or no? And Guss tries to be like, oh, I don't know. It's like, well, and as long as the answer is no, that the cartel will still, keep killing their men and disrupting their products. So finally, after this incident, Guss calls them back and says yes. So that means that Guss is going to have to go to Mexico and help teach the cartel chemists how to make the blue meth, and also be completely in business with Guss. And of course, we know that Guss has alternative motives for this, which I'll get into a bit later. But basically, so Guss meets with Jesse and has a dinner and tells him, look, will you go to Mexico with me? And of course, Jesse's really freaked out because he thinks he's going to die. He doesn't know much about chemistry. So he goes to Walt for some help. Now, during this time, Walt gave Jesse a cigarette full of rice in order to poison Guss with, and tells Jesse, if you're ever with Guss again, kill him. It's our only way out. It's our only way to survive. It's our only way to win. But this has gone on for a long time. Jesse keeps saying that he hasn't seen Guss, so Walt puts a bug, hence the name of the episode, on Jesse's car and tracks him, and he can see that Jesse clearly went to Guss's house and was there for 2 hours. And so when Jesse comes to him and with the cartel thing and asks him for advice, Walt pretty much ignores that and then sort of grills Jesse if he saw Guss, and Jesse of course says no, because he knew that Walt would react negatively. But then Walt starts to freak out and get all pissed off, and it's like, you were there for 2 hours and you never had a chance to use the rice. And Jesse explained like they were both eating from the same pot, but Walt doesn't buy it. It's like he thinks, oh, you don't want to do it, you're just and which is funny because we saw in the scene itself when Jesse was there that he was considering using it. Like, he kept looking at it, he wanted to use it. So Walt's actually wrong. But what's funny here is that Walt is so terrified, he's so in like primal mode, fear for his life, that he's kind of lost all reason, and he's so terrified it causes him to react of really upset, and and he just sees that Jesse, like, you're trying to kill me. You don't want to do anything, and Jesse's pissed off that Walt didn't trust him and bugged his car, and he says, after everything I did for you, and I love this line, Walt's like, what you did for me? What you did is kill me. You signed my death warrant. And then Walt really does not react very well, where he tells Jesse that what he can do now is go to Mexico and fuck up like he will and get killed and end up in a barrel, which of course Jesse considers a very strong possibility. So the fact that Walt is sort of seems to be pushing him in that direction, well, that throws him over the edge, and he throws the bug at Walt and sort of hits him very hard, causing him to bleed, and that pisses Walt off, who thinks that Jesse's the one who failed him and he wants him dead. So a huge fight ensues, and I gotta say, this is my favorite part of the episode. This is why I think I rate this episode so high, because that whole fight scene was so super intense. Because at the moment they're being controlled by their emotions, which are both running really high, because both of them fear for their lives, and both of them see the other person as a hindrance, or sort of pushing them more towards the thing they fear the most, them getting killed. So they both think the other one is failing them and pushing them to be killed. So they take it out and just beat the crap out of each other. And of course, Jesse, being the younger, more spry person, ends up getting the better of Walt and just beating the ever-loving shit out of him, until the point where he says, can you still walk? And when Walt confirms he can, he says, like, well, get the fuck out of here and never come back. Which is damning, seeing how much they depended on each other, how they were all each other had, how their friendship was sort of the endearing thing, as fucked up as it is, throughout the entire show. So that was a really powerful moment. So yeah, I really loved that one. So that leads me to my number 24, Crazy Handful of Nothing. This is the season 1 episode, and in my opinion, the best season 1 episode, that kind of where got Walt's whole career selling meth into overdrive, where they had cooked a lot of this powerful meth, but they had no way to distribute it, no way to properly earn all the money through their sort of street cred or whatever. And so they got the idea to sell to this guy named Tuco, who Skinny Pete, Jesse's friend, put him through. And it's like, oh, I served prison with him, everything's going to be okay. But Tuco turns out to be a psychopath who has no moral compunction or whatever, and is a very dangerous man who just likes to beat the crap and kill people for no reason. And so when Jesse proposes this deal with Tuco responds to this proposal by beating the fuck out of Jesse and stealing his meth. And so Walt, not to be deterred and to show the sort of how his brain works, and he comes up with the ingenious plans, he comes up with the plan to he goes to Tuco, and he comes up with his own plan, saying, look, I don't like what you did to my partner, but I still want to propose a working relationship where I can sell this meth. And he brings like a bag of what Tuco thinks is meth, and Tuco is like, really, so let me get this straight. I beat the piss out of your partner, I steal your meth, and you show up here and you give me more meth. And Walt's like, well, I gotta correct you on one thing there. That's actually not meth. And he throws it at the wall, and it fucking explodes. And they refer to it as exploding meth, but really it's not. That's what it's been commonly called, but it's not actually meth. It's just a explosive substance that's made to look like meth. And so Walt holds it there and is like, I'm gonna blow this whole fucking place up. And so that earns Tuco his respect. And Tuco gives him some money for the meth that he already took, and agrees to work with them in the future. Now, part of me thinks that's kind of like, I don't know if Tuco wouldn't actually just do that until Walt's out of the room with the exploding meth, and next time he sees Walt, just shoot him in the head. But we need a show, so this actually works. But it's such a great. This is the episode, because I think this is the first time Walt mentions the name Heisenberg, because when Tuco asks, "What's your name?" he says Heisenberg. And so this is the birth. This episode is basically the birth of Heisenberg. Not just because it's the first time he said the name, but just the character, the persona of Heisenberg is... Walter White is a family man who was a high school teacher, who's just a normal middle-aged man. Heisenberg is the meth dealer, drug lord, who becomes like an empire building. And this is, to be fair, season 1 was slowly starting to build this persona, this Heisenberg persona, but this is when it really comes. Like, that was mainly like in the fetal stages. That was the conception part of Heisenberg. This is the birth of Heisenberg. This is when all that's the build up really comes, and Heisenberg only gets older and more mature and more independent as the show goes on. And it's also because it also the first time we get the Heisenberg look, because when he shaves his head and has that hat. and I love like Walt's sort of response after his encounter with Tuco, where he just goes in the car and just starts yelling, because the whole time, of course, he was terrified. This is things he's never done before, and as I said, it's the birth of Heisenberg. So yeah, that was quite a powerful episode. So we'll get now into my number 23, which is Buyout. So this is a season 5 episode. This is the episode that follows Dead Freight after Todd kills a little boy, and this, of course, really impacts Jesse so much that he, at first, like, the episode begins with him just like Todd just trying to casually be like, well, I had to do it, Jesse just punching him, and then figuring out what they want to do with Todd going forward. However, now they're set up, because before they weren't set up to do their meth business, but now they have unlimited supply of methylamine, so they can make their powerful blue meth. They have the means, they have a lab, everything's ready to go. And now Jesse and Mike want to back out, which pisses Walt off. Mike, of course, he has to back out, and Walt agrees with that, because the heat, the DEA, is on to Mike and encircling him, so Mike needs to step away because he has too much heat. But Jesse is just too traumatized over the death of the boy and thinks they're doing bad things and doesn't want any part of it, and that Walt does not buy, and Walt keeps trying to convince Jesse to stay, but he won't. So Mike and Jesse make a deal with Colonel Young from Stargate Universe and to sell their portion of the methylamine so he can make meth, but Colonel Young is not okay with just getting 2/3 of the methylamine. He wants the whole thing, or there's no deal. So Jesse, we get this great dinner scene between Jesse and Skylar, which is another thing. That thing is a hilarious scene. But anyway, so Jesse goes to Walt and tries to have a calm, casual conversation about how Walt should buy out. There's like no reason not, and Jesse actually makes a lot of sense. There's no reason for him not to do it. Now, I've mentioned this before, that a lot of people state that the show is about Walt cooking meth and getting in the drug business in order to have enough money for his surgery, for his cancer treatments, and to leave his family after he's gone. But in actuality, that's just a pretense. And what really happens, and what they really laid the bricks for in the first season, is that Walt wants to make something of himself, that his pride was hurt, and he brings up the whole gray matter thing, which I said was a very important building block in season 1, and he brings it up again here, that he had a chance he tells Jesse the story that he was a part of this company. He was a founding member who had equal shares, but because there was he had a bad relationship, and the girl he was with left the other guy who was also the other partner in his company, and he just wanted to get emotionally away from the company. He took a buyout for, I think it was $5,000 or something ridiculously small like that, and then the company went on to be worth billions. So he literally could have been a billionaire, and so he sees this as the same sort of situation, and where he's like, why would I sell, my share of the methylene for pennies on the dollar if I could keep it and make way more. But Jesse properly points out this is not, they're offering $5 million. That's not pennies on the dollar. And that's why I say that this is proof that it's not about helping his family, because, and Jesse points this out, if what you said was true, this is for your cancer treatments and for leaving enough money for your family, $5 million is more than enough to accomplish the goal. Congratulations, you won. You're the winner. You accomplish your goal of getting enough money to leave your family and for your cancer treatments. But as I said, that's not his real goal. That was a pretense. He even says that in the scene. He's like, it's about empire building. He's letting his ego get the better of him, and he wants to make something of himself. And as he says at the end of the show, he likes doing this. And so he's so obsessed, he absolutely refuses to give up his part of the methylamine. So Mike tries to force the situation and handcuffs Walt to the wall and says, and he still intends to pay Walt his share. He's like, look, I'm forcing you to earn $5 million. Ooh, what a bad person I am. But Mike, of course, is in trouble with the law, so he has a meeting with the lawyer that he has to go, otherwise it'll look bad for him. So he has to leave Walt alone, and Walt finds a way to get out of there. And Walt, seriously, shears himself and causes, all this pain just to get out of the handcuffs. It shows how obsessed he was and how determined he was not to give up his share of the methylamine. And so, yeah, that was a great scene. That was a great dynamic that really gets into the mindset, and of course this builds into the next episode, which I'll get into later. So anyway, let me now get into my number 22, which is an episode called Buried. This is a season 5 episode. Again, this one is in the second half of season 5 that sort of deals with Walt finding out that, or Hank finding out what Walt's all about, and he has this huge confrontation with Hank in a previous episode, and he immediately leaves in, and he's like, oh fuck, I should call Skylar, and he tries to call Skylar, but Hank gets to her first, and then she goes to meet with Hank, and so through Saul's advice, Walt automatically assumes that Skylar's already turned on him and is working with Hank. So they work very fast to move the money, because that's the one thing Skylar knows about that could connect him to it. And you get that beautiful scene with Bill Burr and Huel, where Huel wants to, I'm gonna do it, and just lies on a huge giant pile of cash. And Bill Burr's like, come on, we got better things to do than play Scrooge McDuck. I fucking love that scene. But then, Walt, so they take the money to Walt, and Walt takes it out in the middle of the desert and buries it. And meanwhile, Skylar is actually not working with Hank, and Walt assumed wrong. But however, as I talked about in my review, it's kind of Skylar's fault for not answering Walt's call first. She kind of ignored it to talk to Hank, but she should have actually called him and reassured him that what she was really doing and that she was going to stick by him. But because it took her too long to do that, that kind of made Walt sort of destroy his phone and assume that she was against him. So in the meanwhile, she's desperately trying to get a hold of Walt because she's not going to turn on him, and this is causing strife with Hank and Marie. And Marie actively tries to take the baby away from Skylar, which, a huge fight ensues between them. But then Hank, of course, tells Marie to stop it. But Hank, of course, is not at all happy about what Skylar's doing. So they're pissed off with Skylar. She desperately needs Walt's help, but he's out in the middle of the desert burying the money. And he comes home and she's pleading with him, and he just collapses and faints on the floor from exhaustion. So that was a pretty powerful, and also you get the stuff with Jesse, who's gone off the deep end. He's completely depressed and trying to he just throws his money away because he doesn't want it. It was a pretty good episode. Anyway, we will now get into my number 21, which is Grilled, season 2 episode. It was a really intense episode. So this is the episode where Tuco kidnaps Walt and Jesse because he wants to take them away and steal them and take them to Mexico. Now, again, Walt and Jesse have a plot to kill Tuco because they think Tuco's out to kill him because they saw Tuco kill one of his men. And they think that Tuco killed another one of his men, but in fact, we find out later the other one just got crushed by a car. Tuco actually didn't kill him. So again, this is all about miscommunication because Jesse and Walt think that Tuco's out to kill them, but in fact he's not. And Tuco's not aware that Jesse and Walt were trying to kill him by poisoning him with ricin. And then this is the episode we're introduced to the great Hector Salamanca, who I think in this episode is kind of just played for laughs, how he has his bell. But it's also, you get a really super intense scene because they don't realize how coherent he is. So they openly, Walt and Jesse talk about their plans to poison Tuco by sticking the ricin in his food. And Hector hears this, and Hector tries to warn Tuco of this, but of course the only way he can communicate was by hitting the bell. So it takes Tuco a while to sort of realize what's going on, and Hector's the whole time just going like staring at Walt and Jesse. It's obvious that he's super pissed at them, but Tuco just doesn't know why, but then slowly starts to realize that it's because he's trying to kill him, and like Hector even throws the sandwich on the floor. God damn, it was such a super, super, super intense. It's probably one of the best sort of suspense, Tarantino-esque, I would even describe it. He was a master at suspense, in my opinion, and it was just the way it built was just so damn good, and it built up to the confrontation when Tuco actually did try to kill Jesse. And Walt and Jesse worked together to get the better of Tuco, and then Hank showed up and finished the job, and not even realizing that Walt and Jesse were there and killed Tuco. So that was a pretty amazing episode. So, we now get into my number 20, getting into my top 20. And my number 20 is the episode Better Call Saul. This, of course, is the introduction of Saul Goodman, and I love this episode. I think it's a great introduction to this character. I think it's why this character really worked and eventually got his own show. And just like, it's probably the best comedy episode the show has done, but there's some seriousness to it as well, of course. But there's just so funny moments, and this episode just works like so well. Like especially like the opening scene where you see Badger like selling to that actor I've seen in so many places before, but he was like, "You're a cop, come on, there's that van over there, they're obviously cop cars, you guys suck at hiding things." But so Badger was right, but he lets himself be convinced by the kids, like, "Look man, I'm not a cop, I'm just trying to buy an eighth, whatever." And then so he does buy it, and there's a go, and the two vans he pointed to come around. And And he was exactly right. Oh my god, that was such a great scene. And then of course, enter Saul Goodman, where Badger's like, "Are you gonna get me off?" He's like, "What am I, your prom date?" Like, just the banter that Saul has. He thinks he's the public masturbator. It's like, come on, why don't you just do it at home like everyone else? He's like, "No, man, I'm not a public masturbator. It's for meth thing." I was like, "Oh, right." It's just such a funny scene. And then, of course, you get, like, they built an entire show off of one scene from this episode where Jesse and Walt, because Walt tries to convince, Saul to get Badger off, but Saul's not aware of what's going on, thinks, Walt's posing as Badger's uncle. It's like the best thing for him, the easiest way for him is just to inform on this Heisenberg character, not realizing that Walt is this Heisenberg character, so he desperately doesn't want that. So they kidnap, they come, and it does show how immature Jesse and Walt, especially at this stage in the show, are doing this kind of criminal things, and how they kidnapped Saul and take him to the desert and threaten to kill him unless he, to make sure that Badger doesn't inform, and they try to get him off some other way. So the entire show, if you don't know, Better Call Saul was sort of based off of this one scene where Saul, because when Jesse and Walt initially capture Saul and take him out to the desert and threaten to kill him, he thinks it's the cartel. He says, "It wasn't me, it was Ignacio." And it says, "Did Lalo send you?" So then we actually meet the characters of Ignacio and Lalo, who become main characters in Better Call Saul, and we get the background of how he got involved with the cartel. He says, "I'm a friend of a cartel, amigo de cartel," which is a phrase they use in Better Call Saul, and we see how he becomes a friend of the cartel, what exactly who Lalo Nacho is, and of course this hasn't become clear as the recording of this video because the last season of Better Call Saul is yet to come out. We're just going to make it very clear what he means by, hopefully, by "it wasn't me, it was Ignacio," which is something I keep bringing up over and over again in my reviews of Better Call Saul. And also just how impressive it is that they created an entire show off of just this one scene of random shit. But anyway, the episode itself is quite amazing in how they come up with the scheme. That Saul comes up with the scheme to use the Jimmy in and out to pretend to be Walter White, so they make it seem like Badger's cooperating, and then in the meantime they have a patsy so that they'll actually stop looking for Heisenberg. And so Saul proves himself to be a huge asset, and so at the end he tracks Walter White down and comes up with a proposal to be his sort of criminal lawyer and involved in this enterprises, which actually is very helpful for Walt going forward. But yeah, I love that episode. Anyway, let me now get into my number 19, which is Dead Freight. Some people had this in their top 5 or as their number 1. I love this episode, but not that much, to be fair. But it's still a very powerful episode. And I like how it begins with them sort of interrogating Lydia, where Mike desperately wants to kill Lydia, and Walt and Jesse are a bit more lenient, and Walt finds a way to use her to get the methylamine because she proposes attacking or robbing this train that has an ocean of methylamine, as she describes it, but Mike describes the highest as impossible. But Walt, of course, showing his brilliance and his genius and never to be outdone, comes up with a way to rob the train without anyone ever knowing that it was robbed, that they would switch out the methylene for water, and that they would just assume that the supplier watered down the methylene, and they would never know any difference. And you have Bill Burr drives the truck to block the train while Walt and Jesse try to pull off this hike. Now, unfortunately, they also included Todd, who at this stage was just kind of a nothing character who was involved in the pest control thing that they were using as a cover to cook. But this is the episode that introduces Todd as the psychopath, sociopath that he is, who, and it's funny, it's not funny, I guess ironic maybe is the better word to use, but it's actually quite powerful the way, because Jesse himself reinforces to Todd, like right before they do it, it's like, it's very important no one ever know about this. The whole point of this is that no one knows, no one can ever know. Now in Jesse's mind, he's thinking that Todd might blab his mouth, which he actually does in the later half of the season, to be fair. And so he's trying to make it clear to Todd that he can never tell a single soul about this. But in Todd's mind, he's saying if there's anyone ever sees this, they need to be killed, because no one can ever know. And that's what happens. So at the end, when a little boy in a dirt bike just happens to drive by and wave innocently at them, Todd's mind, no one could ever know. So that means there needs to be no witnesses. So he just takes out his gun and shoots him. And of course, as I already talked about, this has serious after effects for Jesse. So yeah, this is it was a really intense heist episode. It had a powerful ending. And it really shows that I love seeing sort of Walt, Jesse, and Mike working together to accomplish something. I love that dynamic. So in this episode, showcases is probably the best. So really good episode. So now we'll get into my number 18, an episode called Hermanos. So yeah, and this is a season 4 episode that shows like Hank sort of realizing that Gus is the crystal meth kingpin and no one else believing him, and he's trying to like do stakeouts with Walt, where Walt of course is just worried that by being involved in these stakeouts is just going to get him killed. But mainly why I like this episode is for the Gus stuff, because this is when we really delve into Gus's background, and it starts to show his sort of relationship with Hector. I think we see him visit him at the nursing home and sort of taunt Hector, and it shows him, of course, like trying to his conflict with the cartel and why he doesn't trust him. But the best thing about this episode, of course, is the flashback at the end, which explains everything and is actually still hugely relevant for Better Call Saul. Like watching Better Call Saul made me want to go back and watch this flashback again, because it took place before even Better Call Saul, and it really explain Gus's entire motivation, because we see him with his partner, who do the chicken restaurant, the El Pollos Hermanos, and trying to sell the meth and to the cartel, and the cartel at the moment doesn't really aren't interested. They think it's just a stupid bicycle crank, or they think it's a hillbilly thing, and that they can't really make money off it the way they can with something like cocaine. But they try to sell it to them, and they're like, look, instead of growing it and having the transporter, we can manufacture this at one location, and it's a lot safer, and it can be more powerful and addictive and better. But apparently the cartel had already made up their minds that they didn't want to do this, and it was a stupid idea. And so Hector himself, who's being an asshole to Gus and his partner the whole time, kills Gus's partner. And there's some speculation, some people think it's heavily implied that Gus and his partner are in fact lovers, but it's never stated outright. But a lot of people believe that is the case, and I'm open to that. I think that's definitely a possibility. But because we do see, regardless of whether or not they were actually lovers, we do see that he was a very important person to Gus, that Gus cared about this man deeply, and so see him killed right in front of his face by the cartel is something he never forgave the cartel, or never forgave Hector for that matter. And ever since that moment, was always seeking the revenge. Even when he was working with the cartel, it was always with the end goal in mind of getting his revenge, something that he's actually at this stage very close to accomplishing. So that really set the stage for his motivation, his backstory, which, as I said, will go even deeper into Better Call Saul. So yeah, very great moment, very powerful episode. Alright, so now let's get into my 10 rated episodes. Let's start with my number 17, which is Blood Money from Season 5. This is the mid-season premiere of Season 5, the first episode after we come back from the break, so we get the next sort of scene that sort of teases the end, that shows, New Hampshire, why I guess you could say, the older, more disheveled, miserable Walter White, and he goes back to his house to retrieve the rice, and the neighbor sees him. He's like, "Hello, Carol," and she freaks out. Again, it's nice. I love this foreshadowing. But the episode deals with Hank realizing that Walt is in fact Heisenberg, and how he's like so freaked out, he almost gets in a car crash. He's out of, he isolates himself, and he does all this sort of investigating with the pen board and the string. I don't know if he actually does that, but he basically does that. Like, he looks up and finds out all these incidents that didn't really make sense to him are now starting to come clear now that he actually puts Walter in those positions. Where, meanwhile, Walt is, starting to figure out that something's kind of not right with Hank, that he's a bit off. And also Jesse, Jesse wants to give the money away to the kid that Todd killed, and Mike's granddaughter, and Walt tries to convince Jesse that Mike's still alive, but Jesse knows that he's full of shit. And of course, this ends with Jesse just throwing the money out at random people, when Saul wouldn't help him actually give the money away. And but the best thing about this episode by far is that ending, which is super intense. The confrontation between Walt and Hank, where Walt, starting to realize that something's wrong with Hank, and he notices that his book is missing, so he suspects, and then he finds a bug on his car, so he suspects that Hank is onto him, and he goes over to confirm it, and sure enough, he does in fact confirm it, and he even says to Hank, "Did you put this on my car?" Hank just closes the garage door without doing anything, without saying anything, and then just punches him in the face as soon as the garage door is shut. Walt at first tries to play around it, but eventually Walt is kind of sick of it, and kind of can tell that Hank is not going to be dissuaded from this. And Hank is just like, "I don't even think I know you anymore. I don't know who you are." And Walt says, "Call me." Well, if that's true, if you really don't know who I am, then maybe your best course of action is to tread lightly. God damn! And this is like full on Heisenberg mode, because of course this is after he's retired, but he, as I'll get into shortly, became full on Heisenberg. He became full on drug lord, crime lord, evil dude, and this is him sort of channeling getting back into that mode. And just being like, "Well, if you don't really know who I am, then maybe you should not try to fuck with me." And god damn, it was so intense. I just love that so much. Anyway, we'll now get into my number 16, which is 1 Minute, a season 3 episode, making its rare appearance on my countdown. This was a pretty powerful episode. So again, this is another episode I mainly like for its ending, but this deal with the aftermath of Hank beating the fuck out of Jesse, when in fact it was Walt. And this is something, getting back to the previous episode, Hank finally realized it was actually Walt who did this. But where they were trapped, Walt and Jesse were trapped in the trailer, and Hank was about to come in, so Walt calls someone and has them pretend to be Marie and say that Marie, or from a hospital, that Marie was in a bad car accident, in order to make Hank go away. But at this stage, Hank didn't know that was Walt, and he thought it was Jesse, so he goes over and beats the shit out of him. Of course, he has no warrant or reason to do so, so this puts him in trouble with the Force. And I don't know, I may be cynical, but you get that funny scene with Saul seeing Jesse, where Jesse's like, completely beat up and has a swollen eye, and he looks like shit. And Saul shows up and is like, "Hey, Adrian," saying that he looks like Rocky, and Jesse's just like, "Ugh." And so Walt calmly tries to convince Jesse not to press charges against Hank, but Jesse's like, "Fuck no, I'm gonna take him down, man. Fuck this, blah blah blah." And I think this is when Walt starts to change his mind about working with Jesse, because at this stage you like alien this, and I'm not working with you anymore. And I think he offers that as incentive for him not to press charges against Hank, but Jesse's not convinced. But I can't remember how, but eventually he is convinced. But anyway, Hank is dealing with the consequences from this. He's in trouble, of course, with the DEA, who eventually take his gun and badge away from him, just in the nick of time too, because those two cousins are coming to kill him. Now, this was again part of Gus's sort of master plan, because the two cousins in the previous episode were as close to killing Walt until he managed to call them off. Because, of course, he doesn't want Walt to be killed, because he needs them to build his meth empire. So, he tries to find some way to deal with these cousins, because he only warded them off temporarily. They're still intent on killing Walt, so he gives them his blessing to kill Hank, who normally and the cartel would still consider Hank off bounds because he's DEA, and they don't want to start shit with the DEA because that just causes more trouble for them. But Gus gives them the go-ahead, but of course Gus has a plan in motion where he doesn't actually want these cousins to be necessarily successful in killing Hank, and I think Gus actually does want the cousins to die in the process. But little does Gus know that Hank had his weapon taken away from him just now, and so he calls Hank, or I don't know if it's Gus exactly, but somebody calls Hank to give him warning. It's like, "You have 1 minute." And it's like 2 people are coming to kill. I mean, that was such an intense scene. Like, I say, like, this best thing about this episode is the ending scene, but that ending scene is so amazing. It is one of the most intense scenes, like, in any film or television or anything ever. You get this ominous call, "You have 1 minute," and then he sees those 2 people, like those badasses they've been building up all season, coming to kill him. And so he manages, just because he doesn't have a weapon, he narrowly manages to escape alive. He manages to kill one of them and severely injure the other, and just barely makes it out alive. But of course he is severely injured in the process. And god damn it, that was such an intense scene. That was such an amazing scene. So anyway, we will now get into my number 15, which is Phoenix, a season 2 episode. So this builds off of when Walt first starts working with Gus, and he has arranged to... Gus was very trepidatious of working with Walt because he was hanging out with Jesse, who was obviously a junkie, and so Walt had to convince Gus to work with him. And so Gus was like, "Fine, you can prove yourself. You have to drop off this place, the money or the meth at this certain time in exchange for money, and it has to be then. There's no second chances. You have to prove yourself." And Gus, of course, happens to call when Skylar's going into labor and about to give birth. And the last thing Walt wants to do is miss his own daughter's birth. But Jesse can't get a hold of Jesse, and he finds out the reason why is because he's doing heroin with Jane. In fact, he breaks into his house and takes the meth. While Jesse is still all strung out on drugs and doesn't even realize what's happening. And so in this episode, Jesse wakes up and sees the drugs missing. He's like, "Oh my god, we've been robbed." And Walt's like, "Really? We've been robbed?" And he starts, of course, yelling at Jesse, and this asshole is like, "You made me miss my daughter's birth." Now, I know some people disputed that. But really in Walt's mind that's the case, because Walt had two choices. He could miss his daughter's birth or give up on this opportunity of a lifetime and have no way to sell their meth. So, he chose. He chose the money, of course, because of the sunk costs and all that. He had already put all this time into this. And so he chose to miss his own daughter's birth. And now, of course, he's very pissed off with Jesse. Because he thinks, and so he refuses to give Jesse his part of the buyout, his part of the money, because he's certain that Jesse will just use it on drugs. And to be fair, I think he's right. Like, we get scenes with Jesse and Jane where they're like, oh, we're going to go to New Zealand, which is a great destination, by the way. Although Jesse says it's New Zealand and Australia. Well, some Australians would like it to be, but it's not. Anyway, so they have this plan. They make all these plans to have this great life together, and they're going to quit heroin and everything. But you do get the sense that they're not going to. Because we'll just do it just one time, this one time to get over this, and we'll just sort of wean ourselves off that. I doubt it. They're addicts, and so addicts say stuff like that all the time. So I kind of think that Walt has a point. So Walt refused to give Jesse his money mainly because well, one thing, he's very pissed off at Jesse for making him miss the birth, but another thing, he thinks that's not best for Jesse, that Jesse would just spend it all on heroin and kill himself. And as I said, I think he's probably got a good point. I think he might be right. We can never know for sure, but I think he's definitely in the right for assuming that is a likely outcome. However, Jesse and Jane aren't very happy about this, and when Jesse tells Jane about it, she, is very pissed off and comes and is a bit more aggressive and comes up with a plan to extort the money from Walt as she threatens to expose him to his wife, which, of course, as we see in the next episode, that happens anyway. She finds out anyway, but she threatens to expose him, not, what he's really doing. And so she extorts him. And so he has to give the money to Jesse and Jane. And he's not at all happy about it. And he thinks that Jane is just a junkie that is a bad influence on Jesse, which is unfair of Walt. Now, maybe she is a little bit of a bad influence, but she was actually clean. It was Jesse who was kind of the bad influence on her. But the Jesse and Jane relationship was a very dynamic, very interesting one. It's my favorite thing about season 2, which I thought really worked. And so Walt goes and gives them money. He's not very happy about it, and he goes and ironically has a drink with Jane's father, Q. It was played by John Delancey. Anyway, and Q kind of talks about how he shouldn't give up on someone who he cares about and loves, and Walt's thinking about Jesse, and ironically this causes Walt to go back to see them, which they had foreshadowed earlier, that if, when they're sleeping over after doing heroin, that they should always sleep on their side, never on their back, because they could choke on their own vomit and die if they sleep on their back. And when he goes over to try to talk to Jesse, he accidentally knocks Jane on her back when she was sleeping on her side, and then she does vomit, and he could save her, but chooses not to, and she dies. Which is, of course, an extremely dark moment for Walt. Now, was Walt in the wrong for doing this? Well, that's a stupid question. Of course he fucking was. He's an evil dude. He's the one that she had slept on her side to prevent this, and he had knocked her over not realizing it. But when he saw that she was in danger, he went to help her, but he stopped himself. But, however, Walt was an evil dude. He's totally in the wrong. He's an asshole. Should fucking die. But to play devil's advocate just a little bit here, Walt in his mind, he's not doing this out of malice. He is doing this, as fucked up as it is, from a fatherly place of wanting to help Jesse. And I think that's what stops him. Is because he in his mind, if Jane survives, then they will both spiral out of control and continue to do drugs until they overdose and die. And again, to be entirely fair to Walt, I think he's right. Does that justify letting her die? No. Not in the least, not in the slightest bit. I'm not saying that it does in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just describing Walt's mindset. His mindset is not out of malice. And I think that's what a lot of Jesse and a lot of other even viewers, audience will misunderstand Walt as like hating Jesse. But I think they make it clear again that Walt actually cares for Jesse and sees him as a son figure. It's just he's like very narcissistic and selfish and sometimes doesn't realize what he's doing. And of course this is one of the cases where he uses extremely bad judgment. Now the fact that this causes 2 planes to crash over Albuquerque, I think that's bullshit, but that's the next episode. This episode was actually very, very powerful. Anyway, we'll now get into my number 14, which is gliding all over, getting back into season 5. This is the mid-season finale that shows the accumulation of, this is basically how I mentioned before that Crazy Handfuls of Nothing was the birth of Heisenberg. This is like Heisenberg becoming a man. This is Heisenberg's coming of age. This is when he really, really, really is Heisenberg. Walter White is dead. Or at least, I mean, he comes back a little later on. But this point in time, this episode, he is 100% Heisenberg. All he cares about is building his empire and being a badass. And and he lies. This is after he killed Mike, and he lies to Jesse about killing Mike, of course. And when he refuses to give Jesse his money, and he says when Jesse, because he desperately wants Jesse to work with him, and when Jesse outright refuses, he like is a total asshole to him and says like, "You get nothing," and kicks him out and doesn't give him his fair share of what he earned. And then proceeds to work with Todd, who's an established sociopath, and work with his uncle, who is a Nazi white supremacist. Again, not the kind of people he wants to work with, so a decision he'll come to regret greatly later on, which of course was a bad decision, but he's so full in his Heisenberg, I'm a badass mode, he doesn't give a fuck, and he works with him to kill the 12 or 9 people, I think it is at this stage, who have the ability to give Walt up to tattle to the DA, and the DA, like, they're like, Hank's like, oh, this is a buyer's market. He thinks he can get the informant very free without having to give much away, because there's 9 or 8 or however many different people who would be willing to, because so Hank's like all up himself. Because there's no way anyone could kill all 9 people at the same exact time in all the different prisons, right? Well, apparently there is a way. And Walt gives Jack tons of money to make it happen, and he says, oh, even killing Bin Laden wasn't this difficult, even though this episode is supposed to be taking place before Bin Laden was killed. This is something the showrunners admit it was a boo-boo on their part. But anyway, so you get that badass montage is one of the most like powerful scenes in the show. They play that, I think it's like a Frank Sinatra song, put yourself up. I mean, it was one, if it's not Frank Sinatra exactly, it's in that style. Start all over again. And while 9 guys are getting brutally murdered, and Walt's just sitting there staring out the window at the beautiful sunset, drinking his whiskey, and gets the call, "It's done." It's good. He doesn't say good, but that's basically what he says. He just hangs up. But really, what a fucking... And it shows... This is Heisenberg. He is full Heisenberg at this stage. He's become the criminal mastermind badass that he always wanted to be. And really, as I said, that's what this whole show is about. Not making money for his family, not providing money for his cancer treatment. It's about becoming the ultimate gangster badass, empire building, as he says. And he realizes that this has always been his true intentions all along. It's just become more apparent here when he's able to accomplish this goal. And so the rest of the episode actually skips through time very quickly, which I like. We get other montages of him and Todd cooking until the point where they make a ridiculous amount of money, where Skylar says she doesn't have no idea how much is there. It would take her forever to count it. It's just a redonkulous amount of money. And as I said, Huel will Scrooge McDuck it later on. And she's like, what more could you possibly want? Now, here, Walt does sort of come back from being Heisenberg and does realize that he's did what he's wanted to do. That he's accomplished his thing. Even though he could have accomplished, really, if it was just taking care of his family, he could accomplish that from the buyout, as I said. But, what else does he want? He became the biggest badass. He's empire building. He has more money than Gretchen and Elliot now. And so what else could he possibly need? And Skylar even points it out. I couldn't launder this much money, not with 100 car washes. It would take me over 10 years to do it. And so he way exceeded his means, so he realized there's absolutely no point in keep going. So he decides to retire. And so we see him later on. After he's retired, he's out finally. He tells Skylar, "I'm out." And they get to live the good life, and everything's all good, nice, and taken care of, that is, until Hank goes to take a dump and finds the book that has evidence that Walt is in fact Heisenberg. What an awesome cliffhanger that was. What an amazing, ironic cliffhanger. And of course, this leads to tragedy coming later on, which is amazing. So yeah, this is a really great episode. So now, let me get into my number 13, which is Full Measures, the season 3 finale, which was super intense. This, of course, comes after Half Measures, where Walt runs over these 2 guys that Jesse wanted to kill, 2 guys that work for Gus, thus proving himself unworthy of Gus, and thus making Gus want to kill both Jesse and Walt. Now, the episode begins, I believe, with Walt meeting with Gus, trying to negotiate, "Please don't kill me." And they had that great scene. I love this line where they meet out in the middle of the desert, and Walt's talking to Mike on the phone, and Walt says, "What guarantees do I have?" And Mike's like, "Well, if it makes you feel better, I can guarantee you that I could kill you right now if I wanted to." Which was great. So they kind of negotiate, but Walt knows that that's not going to last, that as soon as Gus is done with him, he's going to kill him, so you know his time is short, and of course they are looking for Jesse and trying to kill him. And so that's when they come up with this desperate plan to... And he also realizes that Gus is trying to school Gale up to replace Walt so he can kill Walt. And we see actually Gus meeting with Gale, and that's very clear that Gus wants Gale to take over. Of course, Gale's ignorant of the fact that Gus is about to kill Walt. But Walt realizes that the only way out is to kill Gale. And now, of course, Jesse is like, "Oh, I'm not killing him," and Walt's like, "Fine, I'll do it." So Walt has every intention to do it. However, Mike and the other goon corner Walt and prepare to kill him. So Walt's out of time. So he uses this Trap to call Jesse under the guise of trying to give them Jesse's position, but in fact he just tells Jesse to kill Gale. And that was such an intense, badass scene that, that Walt's pretending, oh, please, don't kill me, and then calls like, do it. That was so intense. And of course, Jesse desperately didn't want to kill him. I already talked about this will really give him PTSD for doing this. But he realizes this is his only chance to live, and sort of the episode ends with Jesse shooting Gale. It kind of cuts to black, so you don't know for sure, but it's pretty obvious that's what he did. Intense. Super intense episode. Great episode. So anyway, we'll now get into my number 12, which is Say My Name. You're Heisenberg. You're goddamn right. Say my name. And that scene was so fucking iconic. So this follows Buyout, where Walt comes up with his alternate plan rather than to buy out his methylene, which he absolutely would refuse to do. He comes up with another plan to make a deal with Colonel Young that he'll start cooking meth for Colonel Young to distribute because he is in need of a distributor, and so that's a sort of a perfect deal. Rather than giving him the methylamine, he'll cook the meth for Young in order to distribute. And as part of the deal, as sort of a, whatever they call it, they give the $5 million to Mike so he can go off and run away like he needs to. And and I think this might have been the episode. This episode, Walt keeps trying to string Jesse along. It's like, oh yeah, sure. Jesse's like, I'm out too. He's like, yeah, sure. I know you're out, but just cook this one time with me. And just keeps trying to string him along until Jesse is finally like, no, fuck you. I told you I'm out. I'm not doing it. And they get into the conflict, but then of course things get to a head with Mike, because the lawyer that was working for Mike gets trapped and caught by Hank, and they sort of get the lawyer to testify against them. They're using that to get to Mike, so Mike's kind of screwed and he needs to leave town immediately. And he left this escape money that he wants Saul to go get, but Saul's like, look, they have me under surveillance, it's not a good idea for me to go. And Jesse's like, I'll fine, I'll do it. But Mike's like, no, Jesse, because he has these feelings, fatherly feelings toward Jesse's like, I don't want you anywhere near this. So Walt decides to go. Bad move on Mike's part. It's probably the only bad move that he's ever made in this entire show. Of course, he underestimates just how fucking narcissistic and selfish that Walt has become. Because when Walt shows up to give him the money, he tries to convince Mike to give up the names of the 9 guys, and of course Mike absolutely won't do it because he has a principle, he has a code. There's no way he's going to give him the names in order to be killed. And they get into this heated argument where Mike basically... See, I don't think Walt showed up there with intention of killing Mike. I think it was a heat of the moment thing because Mike sort of berates Walt for being a selfish, narcissist, egotist who's letting his own pride get the better of him, which is all true, but he brings up the fact, we had a good thing with Guss, which is, as I mentioned in other videos, actually bullshit, because Walt didn't have a good thing with Guss because Guss was trying to kill him. And then Guss is also trying to kill Jesse, who Mike purports to care for now. So it doesn't make sense for him to say, you could have just stuck your head down and done your work and everything would have been fine. Actually, it wouldn't have been fine. Jesse would be dead, and if not Jesse, then both Walt and Jesse would be dead, or at least just Walt. One of them would die. So his scenario is actually nonsense, but maybe that's how Mike sees things, although I don't think Mike's that stupid to believe that would be the case. He must know not either one Walt or Jesse would have died in that scenario. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So to say he could have just kept his head down and done the work and they would have been fine is nonsense. But anyway, maybe it was the heat of the moment and Mike didn't know what he's talking about. But regardless, Mike berating Walt like that as I said, is the heat of the passion, heat of the moment, passion of the moment. He grabs his gun and just shoots Mike, kills him. And then you had that, and Mike goes off, and Walt's like regrets it, starts to realize it's a huge mistake, and he's like, oh my god, I just realized I could just get the names from Lydia. Like, I don't even need you. Which is true. Like, he didn't even need to go out and do this to Mike. And so he's really regretting what he did, and he tries to tell him, like, I'm so sorry, and Mike's just like, shut up and let me die in peace. Like, oh, God. Oh, what an intense end for an intense character. Amazing episode. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into my number 11, which is El Camino. And as I mentioned, it's not an actual episode of Breaking Bad, but I do consider it part of the show, even though it's not part of the show per se. And I know even then a lot of people maybe don't like this as much as I do and will be sort of disagreeing with my placement of it this high on the countdown. But I actually love this. It's a very different tone than the rest of Breaking Bad, particularly season 5. In fact, I did have a really hard time placing this on the countdown because I was comparing this to all the other episodes that are in my top 15 or top 18 or whatever. They're really like suspense, heavy drama, heavy action, suspense, whatever filled. Whereas this is a lot more sort of meditative, sort of emotional, like very subtly based character story rather than the intense suspense drama of basically everything else. So it's hard for me to, it was like apples and oranges trying to compare where I should place this, but ultimately decided that 11 was the right place for it. Because even though like the actual like outwardly, you know, suspense story of this movie is kind of silly. It's just some random guy who helped the Nazis build this contraption for Jesse, has his money, and he's being a dick and wants to do a Western shootout. Like that part of it is kind of like, that's a bit silly, and that's definitely not nowhere near as great as all the other episodes of Breaking Bad that I have on this list. But that's not really what this movie is about. The movie is, that's just the sort of outwardly thing. As I said, it's more of an introspective of Jesse and how he learns to take control of his own life and basically earn his happy ending. That's what I think mainly the main thing this episode is about. And we definitely, is the most necessary, it's the most needed thing ever made. I can't believe all these idiots are out there. Was this really necessary? Yes, it is. Why are you even asking that question, dumbass? But anyway, because at the end of it, as much as I love the finale of Breaking Bad, which I'll get into later, it did leave Jesse's story, and Jesse was always a very integral part of Breaking Bad. It left it wide open as to what actually happened. I think you absolutely, for this story to be complete, even though it was mostly Walt's story, Jesse was a huge part of it. And for this story to be fully complete, you needed to see how Jesse ended, what he did. And this, as I said, it was a very beautiful introspective about him realizing, and it showed, like, used flashbacks and all these other things to illustrate how it was about how he always let other people control him. And this was why I think towards the end of this film we get the most meaningful flashback with Jane returning, where Kristen Ritter, yeah, God, I love her, she's so great, where she had this philosophy she had stated about going wherever the universe took you, and Jesse's like, yeah, let's do that, and Jane's like, no, actually, that's dumb philosophy. You should control your own destiny. And that beautifully describes the whole film, about how Jesse is taking control of his own destiny. And then you had the disappearer, and I fucking love the interactions between Jesse and the disappearer. They're so great and so true to their characters. And that moment where Jesse says to the disappearer, look, you know, you'll never know how much I regretted not going with you the first time. And that I think is very powerful, because that shows that Jesse let his rage, his emotions, his desire for revenge against Walt get the better of him. And that's why he didn't go with the disappear, because he realized that Walt had poisoned Brock. And so that's why he didn't go with the disappear. And he realized that his life spiraled out of control. All these horrible things happened to him because of that. That had he just let it go and took control of his own life instead of letting Walt and other people control it, he would have been better off. And so that's what he does here. He takes control. He manages to take the money back from that asshole guy by outsmarting him, and takes control of his own destiny, and to have the disappear go take him to Alaska, where he... And I love the juxtaposition to the end of Breaking Bad, where Jesse's driving screaming, to the end of this, where Jesse's like content and driving into his happy ending. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. It really brings me to tears every time. So I don't care what anyone else says. I think this movie is amazing. So now let's get into my top 10. Top 10 best episodes of Breaking Bad. And we'll start with my number 10, which is Crawl Space. Season 4 episode. The episode I think is most infamous for, I will kill your wife. I will kill your son. I will kill your infant daughter. Like, what a fucking intense scene. So this is the follow-up to Guss and Jesse returning from Mexico after Guss already took care of the cartel, and now he has to take care of Walt is sort of all freaked out and trying to find a way to not die, not get killed by Guss. Now at the moment, Jesse says he'll refuse, even after all the shit he's been through with Walt. He's still saying that he'll refuse to work for Guss if Guss kills Walt. So at the moment, it's still in his best interest, and Walt sort of realizes this. Oh, you're not going to kill me because Jesse won't let you. And Guss is like, he'll come around. And so Walt knows that his time is short, that eventually, and especially the bad terms that he and Jesse left on, he realizes that his life is hanging on a thread. And especially him threatening to kill his entire family. Oh my God, like that put him into full freak out mode. But then you have this side plot going on this episode with Skyler. Now this with Ted, because Ted is like the Skyler and Ted side plot was a bit silly because Ted was being really dumb and obtuse. However, I'm pretty sure it's this episode where you get the scene with Huell and Bill Burr going over to Ted to intimidate him, where Saul sends his A-team. And I love that scene so much, where Bill Burr's like, when Ted is like really freaked out, and he's like, no, the point here is to make Huell happy. And he's like, who's Huell? And like, he's Huell. And it's like, Huell, are you happy? Reasonably. Like, that's amazing. I love that. And then Ted, being the moron he is, tries to run and make a break for it and just slips on the rug and hits his head. He's up in the hospital. Oh my God. And it's funny because later he'll play it as if this is the huge gangsters beat him up and intimidated him, but really it's his own dumbass fault. If he just sat down and fucking waited for the check to clear, he would have been fine. But that was an amazing scene. But the huge point, like the reason why this cracks my top 10, it has to me one of the best scenes in the entire show that gives me chills every time I see it, and it's so powerful and so beautiful, is because after Walt was threatened by Guss, of course he wants to use the disappear service, so he goes to Saul, and of course he wants his whole family to disappear, which costs even more money, and he's like, I'll get the money, we're gonna disappear, and he's freaked the fuck out. He wants to disappear because he thinks that's the only way to save his own life and to save his family lives. That's come to this, he's that scared, is that on the edge, because as I said, he knows his life is hanging on a string, so he needs to go grab that money to pay the disappear. But the money's not there because Skylar gave it to Ted to pay off his taxes. And he had that scene such a beautiful, intense scene where Walt cracks. He just loses it and he's just like laughing maniacally when he's lying in that crawl space, hence the name of the episode, and freaking out, going, ah! When he realizes that the money's not there, and Skylar is just staring at him like, what in the fuck? Like, she's freaking out because she doesn't understand the high stakes. She just thinks that he's just mad at her for giving the money to Ted, but of course she doesn't realize that in his mind, they're all dead. They're all about to die because of that, and he can't help it but just freak out and just laugh maniacally. And this shot is shot so beautifully, the way it just zooms out over the crawl space as he's just freaking out and laughing hysterically. God damn it. Some of the best filmmaking, cinematography, editing I've ever seen in anything ever. This is such an amazing scene. I just cannot understate. Anyway, let me go ahead and get into my number 9, which is Confessions. So this is the season 5 episode, which is in the height of the conflict between Hank and Walt. And Walt realizes that sort of Hank's onto him, but Hank, on the other hand, realizes that he needs to have hard evidence of Walt before he goes to his bosses, otherwise he'll be fired for letting his own brother-in-law slip under his nose the whole time. So Walt films this confession and then meets with Hank at the Mexican restaurant, which I think is a beautiful scene. Again, it's like the beautiful comedy has the waiters like, oh, would you like to enjoy this special? And Walt and Hank are having this intense moment. Like, I love that juxtaposition there. But anyway, Hank's is like, we're not going to settle this until you're in prison. And then Marie suggests, well, hey, Walt, if you think your death is going to solve everything, why don't you just kill yourself? That, of course, pisses Skylar off. It's an amazing scene, but it ends with Walt giving Hank his confession, which turns out to just be framing everything for Hank, making everything Hank's fault. Now, I still contend, regardless of what happens after this episode, that this is an amazing, intense, one of the most intense scenes in the entire show. Just watching Marie and Hank watch that DVD as Walt just lays out, oh, Hank made me do it. He threatened to kill me. Hank was working for Guss. And just the looks on their face while they were watching that, and just when the video ended, how they were just frozen, staring, and they couldn't move. So intense. Now, I talked about in my review how I heard the argument that this scene's no good because nothing ever came of it, because they never actually ended using the DVD for any reason. But I strongly disagree with that, because it framed the mode of the conflict between Hank and Walt, and it was and Hank had nothing because of that DVD. He did feel trapped because of it, and it's what caused him to go to Jesse and work with Jesse. And in the end, when Walt was found out, Marie had the conditions for Skylar that she needed to destroy the DVD. Plus, it also really solidifies Skylar taking Walt's side on things, which of course was huge for the conflict between them. And it was just a great scene. So it does actually affect things going forward, even if it was never actually used per se. It completely changed the dynamic of the conflict at the time. But you also get the Jesse stuff, which was also amazing in this episode, which is definitely the combination of the two storylines is definitely why it cracks my top 10, because... And I talked about the irony in this, because this is when Walt suggests that Jesse used the disappearer, and Jesse, of course, is when Walt is showing concern, I'm really worried about you, Jesse. I want the best for you. And Jesse just says, could you just stop playing me just for 1 minute, man? Just stop playing me. You brought me out to the desert to kill me if I say no. But I really firmly believe that Jesse's wrong. And in fact, there's so many scenes throughout the show where Walt does play Jesse, where he is just playing him and getting him. Like there was one earlier in season 5 where he's talking about Andrea. So how are things going? Oh, things are so great. But really, he was just playing him to try to find out if Jesse told her anything. The irony here is that I think, in my mind, this is one of the few times, one of the rare occasions when Walt is actually being sincere and not playing Jesse. And this is the one time where Jesse calls him. And like the earlier, also the scene where Walt was trying to say, Mike's still alive, he's fine. Totally playing him. But in this case, I think Walt is being 100% sincere that he, even though it is what's best for him, because Jesse is kind of a danger to his status, but I think he does, as I said, I think it's been confirmed and reaffirmed throughout the show that Walt does care about Jesse, and Walt does want the best for Jesse, so I think he's being 100% sincere, and he doesn't intend on killing him, as we know later on, because he's still very resistant to the idea of killing Jesse even after he starts becoming an active problem. So clearly he wasn't going to kill him. Clearly he did actually want what was best for Jesse, and Jesse was confused and thought. So there's a lot of irony in that scene. But then you get the big revelation. He goes to take the disappear, but then realizes that Walt poisoned Brock, and so he beats the shit out of Saul, which was an intense scene. And Saul claims ignorance of it. Saul did help him steal the race, and so he freaks the fuck out, and he refuses to. He walks away from the disappear, as I already mentioned, is the decision in his life he'll come to deeply regret. And instead goes to burn Walt's house down, which. And like the whole way this whole scene was shot and the music behind it and the editing it's a thing of beauty. Like the production value of this show is always through the roof, but this is some of the best like put together scenes in any film or television ever. And having like this, the way that they had the sort of GoPro attached to the gasoline canister looking up at Jesse has this like insane, just like throwing the gasoline all around the house and the intense music going down, down. What an amazing way to end the episode. That's why I was kind of a bit disappointed by the next episode, had they waited 20 minutes to actually resolve this, because it was like, But goddamn, what an intense way. Anyway, we will now get into my number 8, which is half measures to go with the full measures. Now, it's funny because I think before the previous top 10 I actually put full measures and half measures together because their names are so similar. It's kind of a two-part. But watching it again, I realized that these are very two distinct episodes. And I actually, even though I love them both, I kind of prefer this one because this deals more with Jesse sort of getting pissed off because he finds out Brock's cousin or something was killed by these, and they also killed his friend. God, I'm blanking on his name in the moment, but his friend from season 2 was murdered by these guys, and so he wants to kill them. But of course they work for Guss, and so this is a no-no. So Guss like has his meeting with them and like tries to smooth everything over, and Guss is like, "Don't involve kids anymore," or whatever. Oh yeah, they hadn't killed that guy at the kid at this stage, but then after they had the meeting with Guss, they killed the kid, and that just throws Jesse over the edge, and Jesse goes to kill them, but of course Walt realizes that this is about to happen, so instead of Walt, this is one of the most surprise, intense endings ever, where Walt just has, he's about to get killed, because Jesse's approaching these two thugs, who are probably a lot more proficient at weapons than he is, let's be fair, approaching them with a gun, ready to have this shootout, where there's two of them, one of him, they're probably better at guns than he is, so he is for sure going to die, and so Walt just comes out of nowhere with his car, runs them over, and then shoots them both dead. And just says to Jesse, "Run!" Like, God damn it! Like, that literally came out of nowhere. That was literally like such an intense scene. And this is that action is what I think really solidifies, in a weird, fucked up way that it is, Walt's love for Jesse. That because it's and one thing that should be clear is that Walt was on good terms with Guss up until this moment. This exact action is what puts him on bad terms with Guss, which causes the whole conflict through season 4, where Walt's constantly fearing for his life. And so Walt does kind of think that Jesse owes him, because the whole reason why he's on the outs with Guss is because of this action that he took to save Jesse's life. So if Walt didn't give a shit about Jesse, or didn't care that much, or was just using him, he could have just let Jesse die, and Walt would still be in a good position with Guss. Walt would not go through all the horror and threatening and bullshit that he had to get through in season 4 if he had simply let Jesse die. But he couldn't, because he loves him and he cares about him. And that, I think, is powerful. I think is, and Hank even points this out to Jesse in season 5, where Jesse's like, "Oh, he doesn't care about me," but he's like, "No, what you're describing, like, he killed these 2 thugs to save your life," and it directly put his life in danger by doing so. By the way, so yeah, super, super, super intense episode. So, let me go ahead and get into my number 7, Tahajali, if I pronounce that correctly. It is a season 5 episode. Speaking of Jesse working with Hank, this is when, after Jesse's abandoned their plans to spy on Walt with the whole meet with the dude who was just meeting his daughter, and Jesse comes up with a different plan to get at Walt through his money. Like, where is he vulnerable was the one piece of evidence he absolutely refused to destroy: his money. So they correctly go to Huel, and we had that great scene where Hank plays Huel because he took a photo of your brains, like a deer brain or something he brought from the supermarket, and threw it down. Jesse made it look like he was shot through the brain. It's like, "Oh, hell no!" and sort of threatens Huel. And there's all these jokes because this episode ends with Huel in the safe house, but then Hank and Gomez are killed, and we never hear what happens to Huel ever again. And so there are all these jokes, and I think they even did like this joke YouTube video where it was like Huel safe house, and they made it like a sitcom out of it. But really, we see that there's another DEA agent here, so there's other people other than Hank and Gomez who are aware that Huel's in the safe house. So after the situation blew over, they would have let him go. So he's not stuck in the safe house where no one knows where. And plus, he could have. They made it clear that he could have left at any time. He just didn't want to because he was afraid Walt would kill them. And again, Walt wasn't going to kill him. That's just the story that Hank made up. But for him, after Walt disappeared and all that shit, and Ozymandias happened, Huel wouldn't stay in there. He could leave anytime he wants. And other people knew he were there. But regardless of all that, They come up with the plan to pretend, and it's like they try to find the money, but they can't find the money, so they come up with a brilliant plan to pretend that they found Walt's money and fake it. And they're banking on that Walt would be so upset and so scared that he wouldn't notice small mistakes and would totally buy their ruse, which he does. So credit to Hank. But in the meantime, Walt had hired Jack, again, huge mistake, working with this shady white supremacist asshole, to kill Jesse. And again, he fucks up. He's too intent on catching Jesse and stopping him from burning his money that he tells him to get there by coordinates, which is very fishy to Jack. And so Jack conspires to steal his money instead, and the episode ends in a huge shootout between Hank and Jack. Super, super, super intense. Great way to end the episode. Anyway, we will now get into my number 6, which is Granite State. Now, some people may be surprised I have it this high. I know there's a fair amount of people who love this episode, but there's also a fair amount of people who don't like it. He thought it was a bit boring or a waste of time. I think it was brilliant, personally, especially from a character perspective, which, as I said, is the definite strength of the show. Even though there's some great, intense suspense and action scenes in the show, that's not the point of the show. The point of what makes the show so great is not the intense suspense and action. It is the drama. It is the character stories. And this is an amazing character story that shows Walt's downfall. Ozymandias, which, don't worry, I'll get to that soon. That shows how that is the beginning of Walt's downfall. That shows him, like, crashing. But this shows the after effects that now he's nothing. And this is definitely this is the episode we absolutely needed. I think I even heard some people suggest, is this episode necessary? Of course. Come on! Of course it is. What kind of moron do you have to be to think this episode is not necessary? It is so necessary. And it really it ties in beautifully to the preview scenes we got at the premiere episode of season 5 and the mid-season 5 premiere. Which I love how they tie together so perfect. Although they tie more into the finale, but here they do show why is he had a New Hampshire plates and why is he supposed to have hair. It's because he's sort of abandoned chemotherapy because he's in hiding. And it really gets into his mindset. And this is something I think a lot of people don't realize, is that his time of being alone in the cabin is really had him where he had time to stop and think about things. This is where he realized that he ruined his life, that he ruined Skylar's life, that he didn't really try to do it for the family. All this he admits in the finale, which does make for a great finale, but this is when he comes to realize. This is that time alone is when he gets to contemplate on his life and realizes what an asshole scumbag he's become and all the wrong, bad thing. And this is also because in the previous episode he wanted Jesse dead, but in the next episode he saves Jesse's life. So this is also when he realized what he's done to Jesse and how much that he's wronged Jesse, and that it makes him change his mind as far as that's concerned as well. And it's great you see that in his deterioration, being trapped in the solitude. And I fucking love the Disappear. I already mentioned him in El Camino, but this is his only other appearance, although he has a brief cameo in Better Call Saul, but this is like the first episode he appeared in. I love how he was hinted at a lot, but this is the first time we actually see him, and they get a pretty well-known actor, Robert Forster, who I mainly know from Jackie Brown. He gave a great performance there. He was nominated for an Oscar for that. But anyway, he's amazing as the Disappear, and I love the Disappear himself because, he helps people save their lives and find hiding, but really he doesn't give a fuck about them. He really has no scruples, but he's honest though. Like, he doesn't hide that fact. He's very clear. He states things very clearly. He never tries to deceive or hide people. And one of my favorite scenes is when, because Walt has a huge barrel of money, but he's dying of cancer, and he knows that if he stays in that cabin, he will eventually die, and his money will be left there. So he asks the Disappearer, like, look, after I die and you find this money here, will you give it to my family? And I love the Disappearer's response because, again, this shows how frank and honest but unscrupulous that he is. His only response is to say, if I said yes, would you believe me? Which I fucking love that. That's amazing. And so this is when Walt comes to realize that, look, I can't just die here because it will be for nothing. I need to take action. So his idea is to call Walt Jr. to try to somehow sneak him the money, but Walt Jr. of course hates his fucking guts because he killed Hank and he freaks out. It's like, no! And that was, again, an intense scene. So then Walt's next thought is, well, Skylar and Walt Jr. are in trouble with the law. They'll never be in trouble with the law. They'll always be in trouble with the law as long as I'm still free. So the only course of action is to give myself up because I'll die soon anyway. So that will at least save them. But then he sees Gretchen and Elliot on the news giving their interview about how Walt had nothing to do with their company. Of course, that damages his pride, but it gives them another idea, which we'll see come to fruition in the finale, of how he could get the money to his family. And we see the brilliance of the Walter White as he leaves his Heisenberg hat there and takes off. Beautiful. Also, we get the very, very tragic scene, which in my opinion is the most tragic scene in the entire show, where Todd kills Andrea. Oh my God. It's just, I almost don't like it because it's so tragic. It's so depressing because Andrea she never did anything wrong. She was just an innocent victim that happened to be friends with Jesse. And because Jesse tried to escape the hell that he was in, they went and killed Andrea and shot her in front of him. Oh my God, that's just, it's beyond heartbreaking. It's beyond heartbreaking. As I said, I think it's more heartbreaking than anything that happens in Ozymandias even. It's oh my God. Anyway, let's get into my top 5 now. God, this show's so awesome. I can't believe I haven't even gotten to the top 5 yet. All right. My number 5 episode of Breaking Bad is End Times. This is a season 4 episode. This happened after this follows Crawl Space, where Walt realizes that his whole family, his whole life is in danger. It's hanging on a thread, and he doesn't know what to do. And Gus has moved over to Jesse cooking meth, and he's all for pro Jesse. And so he realizes that he had alienated Jesse, which was dumb, because Jesse's the only thing keeping him alive. And so he tries to go to Jesse, but Jesse throws him out and fuck you, get the fuck out of here, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. And so he's trapped. He doesn't know what to do, and he's in this desperate situation. They call in, he calls in this thing to the DEA to make it seem like someone's trying to kill Hank, because Gus is in fact trying to kill Hank. He made it very clear because Hank is on to Gus, so Gus is wanting to kill Hank, so he calls in this threat to take him off the scent. And so Scott and everyone go to hide there, but Walt refuses to go, and Marie takes it. Oh, why don't you go? Of course. And so he tries to come up with a plan, and you see him sitting by his pool, and he looks over at a plant, and then we cut the black. I love the reveal later. But anyway, so he goes to, so Brock is poisoned, and Jesse assumes that Walt's responsible because he can't find his Bryson cigarette. So he thinks that Walt took it and poisoned Brock. So he goes to Walt, and Walt is in, survivalist mode, and hiding out in nowhere, saying they're gonna kill me, blah blah blah. And he lets Jesse in, and Jesse pulls a gun on him because he thinks he killed poisoned Brock. And Walt just starts laughing hilariously, again the crawl space thing, and Jesse's stop laughing. And then Walt's this is brilliant. I wasn't even thinking about this. That I was expecting a killer, Gus to send a killer all this time, and it's you, Jesse. You're the one who he's gonna send to kill me. So he proposes that Gus poison Brock in order to motivate Jesse to kill Walt. And oh my God, the scene is amazing. It's one of the more intense scenes in the show. It's a great interaction between Walt and Jesse. How Walt is I did not do this. It's amazing acting. Much better than my acting, by the way. But amazing acting. And he eventually is able to convince Jesse that, and he almost got killed, and he very well could have gotten killed here, but he's able to convince Jesse that it was Gus who poisoned Brock. But of course we find out in the next episode it was actually Walt who poisoned Brock. So this whole scene he's actually play acting, and it's amazing acting. So not only is Bryan Cranston a great actor, Walter White is a great actor. But we do know that that he actually he didn't poison Brock with ricin, he poisoned him with something else that was not terminal, so he knew it wouldn't kill him. But it was all to put this plan in motion to get Jesse on his side, and it works. And fucking, that was an intense scene. And so they come up with this plot to lure Gus into the hospital, and they try to blow up his car. But Gus, of course, having this magical sixth sense, senses a trap and escapes, and thus it seems like it's impossible to kill him. Wow. An absolutely amazing episode. I almost put this episode as my number 3 or number 4, higher than the next episode. Just barely scraped the next episode in, so we get into my number 4, which is, I want to take his face off. Face off. Now, some people would put this at number 1 or number 2. I think I had this at number 2 before, so it dropped a couple of slots, but it's still my top 5. I still think this is an absolutely amazing episode. It is, on second watch, it is a bit slow and does take a bit to get going, but that ending, man. The ending is so good. Especially the reveal when he looks, when they zoom into that plant in his backyard that has the lily of the valley, or whatever it's called, which the doctor says what was used to poison Brock, and so it's revealed that he oh my god, that was such an, but I love the accumulation. This is like the accumulation of Gus's story, and I think it's the best possible death they could have devised for this character, and as one that he really earned. And it really does show that Walt sort of outsmarted Gus, and how he says to Skyler at the end, "I won," because he knows that this is life and death, and he knows that Gus wants to kill him at every first opportunity. So now that Jesse's on his side, he tries to, like, is there anything you know, anything you can tell me that I can use to my advantage? And he mentions how Gus likes to visit Hector Salamanca in the nursing home. And he's like, well, what is that? How can I use that? Him visiting an old cartel friend. But then, Saul makes it clear. It's like, no, they're not friends. He went there to taunt him. Like, they despise each other. And I love that line where Walt's like, they're not friends. They're enemies. And so, oh god, it's just so beautiful, especially the scene where Walt shows up to Hector, and of course he's like, I know you hate me, and I know you want me dead, but I think there's someone you hate more, and I can help you get your revenge. Like, oh my god, I love that, because he's not talking down to Hector like a lot of people do, and he knows that, and of course we've seen in the previous episode, that after, after Gus killed all the cartel buddies, killed all of his family, he goes to Hector and gloats. And so Hector, of course, his whole life is ruined. Everyone he loved was killed by Gus. And so, of course, he would jump at the opportunity to kill Gus and get revenge, and even sacrifice himself in order to do so. And it was just so intense how Gus's band shows up and they use that ploy of like going to the DEA to make Gus think that Hector's informing on them, but really it's not. It's just a ploy where he says like, suck mine and fuck off. I love that. That was hilarious. But anyway, they had that scene where Gus's man goes to the nursing home to scope out the room, and you see Walt nearby, and you hear like this old lady in the next room going, hello, and in the background, of course, the guy doesn't pay any attention to it, which is good, but it's because Walt is like hiding behind the wall, and this old lady is just like trying to say hello to him. He's like, shut the fuck up. And so this plan also could have easily failed, and maybe Gus wouldn't come there himself to kill Hector. Maybe he would just hire a goon to do it, which is more his style. But, again, this is all about how pride becomes the undoing of the character. It's mainly Walt's pride, but it also, in this case, is Gus. Gus's pride of, I have to be the one to kill Hector. So he shows up and falls right into the trap. And, god damn it, that was such an amazing scene. when, Gus is just taunting Hector. He's about to kill him. He thinks he has the edge, and all of a sudden Hector just gives this like intense look of hatred, and Gus is like, wait, what's going on here? Why are you looking at me like that? Why are you acting like you have the edge here? You don't have the edge, I have the edge. And then he starts banging on that bell, and it doesn't make the bell noise like it usually does, and alerts him that something's off, and he notices, of course, the bomb that's there, and freaks out and goes, ah, and gets up and then explodes. Now, it is a bit goofy and very unrealistic, the scene where and it was, obviously we're doing this to fake the audience out, where Gus walks out of the room and he seems to be okay because they're only showing one half of his face where he looks fine, but then they turn around and show the other half, which is like a skeleton and it completely burned off, and then he collapsed to the ground dead. That's not how that would happen. There's no part of that, no single part of that scene that's realistic, but it was still awesome. It's still an amazing scene to see. He took his face off. Yeah, as Walt says, he won. He got the better of Gus and used his own pride against him. And also, it was a beautiful ending for Gus, because the whole, especially season 4, was building between the feud, as I said, watching his partner and perhaps lover get killed in front of him by Hector, and how this fuel to get revenge on the cartel and to torture Hector, which they actually get more into in Better Call Saul in the prequel, of how much Gus was responsible for Hector being that wheelchair and wanted him to live through a torturous life. And how this was sort of the crowning achievement, was killing his whole family and killing everyone. He achieved his revenge, and as far as Gus is concerned, he won. But then he underestimated Walt, and that Walt was able to use Hector and has this weakness and exploit that. And Hector, in the end, got his revenge. Absolutely amazing. So, anyway, we get into my number 3 best episode of Breaking Bad, and that is Felina, the series finale of Breaking Bad. And I think maybe I do love this episode a lot more than some people do. I still think, and I contend, and I stand by, that this is the best series finale ever created, ever. This is the singular best way to end the show ever. It's Ozymandias, obviously, as you can guess, appears higher on this list, so I think it's a better episode. But the notion that it should have been the final episode, I could not disagree with more. I think you definitely need a follow-up, as I said already, with Granite State. You needed to see the fallout of Ozymandias, and this was like the perfect conclusion, like the perfect closure, like the way that Walt uses Gretchen and Elliot, who again have super importance for the whole show, because they're the part of the main motivation of why Walt became this crime lord, became Heisenberg in the first place. And so it's really meaningful that he uses them as a way to accomplish the one thing he claimed to want to accomplish for the whole time, and that is to care for his family, to get this money to his family. And that was such a great scene. I love the line. It's like when Elliot pulls the knife on him, is like, really? If you want to go that way, you're going to need a bigger knife. Like, such a bad... And the way that he uses his reputation of a badass killer to his advantage, even though we know that he's actually not that big, because he has those red dots show up, and he's like, I hired the 2 best assassins this side of the Mississippi, and they're going to kill you. And just the way he slowly taunts him is like, if you stop paying my family, you don't know, it could be a day, it could be a week, could be a month, could be a year, but sometime you're going to be out jogging or enjoying a cup of joe, and then bang! And then they literally jump. It was so brilliant the way and of course it was just Badger and Skinny Pete pointing laser pointer. So fucking brilliant. Um, but better is the way that he finally like puts, and I love again how this matches up perfectly with those two foreshadowing scenes, how they integrate that into this episode, and how the he finally confesses to Skylar that he didn't do this for the family. Now, I once heard an argument that I maybe misspoke when I says he admits to Skylar that he wasn't doing this for the family, he was doing this for himself. And whereas I should have stated that he was doing this he admitted to himself, not just that he admitted to Skylar, that he admitted this to himself. But as I said, I actually think he admitted this to himself earlier, like this happened during the episode Granite State. But I guess this is the first time he speaks it aloud, so he's admitting it to himself aloud. But I'm pretty sure he already came to this conclusion, but he's making it clear to Skylar and saying it aloud for himself, making it definitive that, yes, I didn't do this for the family. I did it for me. I did it because I liked it. I was good at it. And that is maybe the most powerful scene in the whole episode and the whole show. And maybe that is the most powerful scene of closure we ever got in any show or movie ever. That was so well earned, so poignant, and that's why I balk at the idea that Ozymandias should have been the finale, because the show is not complete without that scene. And then, of course, you have Walt get his revenge on Jack and the other white supremacists. And I do think, and I am of the strong mind, and again, the show keeps reminding us over and over again that Walt thinks of Jesse as a son. Now, granted, 2 episodes previous, Walt tried to actively kill Jesse, but he was still in the heat of the moment. As I said, I think he had time to contemplate and think about it and realize that he mistreated Jesse and that he really does care about him. So I think his main motivation for going there to get revenge, well, getting revenge, of course, is always a good thing. That was definitely part of the motivation, especially for the assholes who killed Hank and they stole his money. But the way he plays it out, and he purposely gets it so he'll bring Jesse up, is that he wants to save Jesse's life. And I think he wants Jesse to be the one to kill him, because I think he realized how he's wronged Jesse, and I think he thinks it would be fitting and poetic if Jesse was the one who finally puts him out of his misery. But of course Jesse doesn't do it because he knows that Walt wants to do it, and he doesn't want to play into him and be his pawn anymore, so he just drives all screaming. And I already said how that's resolved in El Camino beautifully. But this episode is the best ending you could have for the show proper, where Walt slowly dies while at the meth lab, and they play that baby blues song. It's beautiful. There is no such thing as a better ending to a TV show than this. I'm sorry, but there is not. That is just beautiful. Anyway, we'll now get into my number 2, second favorite episode of Breaking Bad, and that is A Salute. Yeah, I come to appreciate this episode a lot more, and I do think this is the second best episode. And it's funny because I don't think this is appreciated as much as other episodes like Face Off or End Times or even Crawl Space. So this is the 4th season episode where Gus and Jesse might go to Mexico to meet with the cartels, and teach them. Jesse tries to teach them how to cook meth. And which are all intense scenes. Like, I love how they're all speaking Spanish, and Gus is having to interpret for Jesse, and Jesse, is like, can you tell this asshole? And he's like, I speak English, as if that's a big revelation. Jesse gets right in his face. It's like, so you know what asshole means then, asshole? I love that. And of course, this is all posturing on Jesse's part. Like, inside, he's shitting his pants. And I love that. I think it was absolutely amazing. But, of course, what makes this episode so amazing, so spectacular, so, in my opinion, the second best, and maybe the best show ever made, is that the scene where Guss gets his revenge on the cartel. It's like, it's so beautiful, especially that happens by the same pool that his partner was killed by, that triggered this whole thing, and that he had this whole plan to poison all the cartel members and drink it himself. In fact, they consider the possibility it's poison, so Guss drinks it himself. But he had taken the antidote, which of course isn't foolproof, beforehand, and then immediately goes to the bathroom to throw it up. And even then, his life is still in danger. So even with all the precautions, it was a very risky move on his part, and it still could have killed him. And there was just, I always talk about the great production in Breaking Bad, and how this has like the best like sort of production value, even better than most movies in my opinion. And one of my favorite scenes as far as like music, editing, cinematography, all those goes, is when Guss is returning from the bathroom after throwing up. And this was before they made it clear that you're starting to get the inkling that he poisoned them, because he went straight to the bathroom to throw up. So you know something's not right. And they had that scene where they had that party music that they're playing, because they're all having a party and celebrating. And they really blast the music, and they follow, like, do a sort of tracking shot following Guss as he's walking back out to the pool, and they play that party music, and then all the cartel members start dying. Like, I think that may be one of my favorite scenes ever filmed. I get goosebumps every time I watch it. It was absolutely amazing, and just the whole thing of how they're fighting off the cartels, and Mike and Jesse help. In fact, Mike gets shot, so Jesse has to sort of drive them away, and he's like, yells at them that Don Eladio is muerto, dead. I probably said that wrong. Sorry for Spanish speakers, but anyway, at least I didn't say murder. Anyway, so they said that yeah, and having them escape, like, that was super, super, super intense. Absolutely amazing. But you know what? The other thing that made me like this episode even better, and like place it a bit higher as far as number 2, was I come to appreciate, especially on this rewatch, the Walt scenes. Because before I thought, oh, the best thing about this episode is the cartel thing, that's amazing, and the Walt scenes are there too. But then I really realized that this is some of the best Walt scenes as well that you get in this episode. It's actually, I think, the crowning achievement as far as the relationship between Walt and Walt Jr. Because this is the episode after Jesse beats the shit out of Walt, which I already covered. And so Walt is like hiding in his home. He's like completely bruised up and beaten. Now he's the one that looks like Rocky. And Walt Jr., like, I think it's his birthday, so he comes over, and Walt's of course avoiding him because he's all beat up, and he's an utter mess. And he's like, because he realizes what a huge mistake that he made with Jesse. He realizes by how, like, letting his anger get the better of him and saying, "What you did is kill me," that he actually made things much worse for himself, because Jesse was the one thing keeping him alive. In addition, he alienated Jesse, someone who he really cares about, and just went to throw him away and told him that, "I hope you die." And he comes to realize what a massive mistake he was, and he's just full of regret. And Walt Jr. sees him in that very vulnerable, true state. And then in the next morning, like, I think this is beautiful. I almost give tears to my eyes. I think it's truly the essential Walt and Walt Jr. scene that really justifies and pays off Walt Jr.'s existence in the show, really. Where Walt apologizes to Jr. and saying, "I don't want you to see me like this," because it hurts his pride, and he hates showing vulnerability around his son. And Junior said, "No, I'm very happy to see you like this. You're not putting on a front. You're not putting on an act. You're not trying to be all brave and awesome. I get to see you for who you really are, and see you at your most vulnerable." And that was like a special thing for him, and they bonded over that. I thought that was an absolutely amazing scene. Really, yeah, and it's the last touching moment that they'll have as father and son, because of course later, not next season, a year from now, Walt Jr. will grow to despise and hate his own father. And so and I'm sure this is something that Walt probably reflected on before his death, thinking of it as this moment that he had with his son. It's, yeah, beautiful. So, now we will get into my number one favorite episode of Breaking Bad, which should come as no surprise. I've kind of been dropping hints throughout this video that it is, of course, Ozymandias, the third to last episode of the show. And this, of course, is, in my review, I called this the best piece of fiction ever, which if I'm not going to say it's the definitive best, which is a kind of hard statement to make without being hyperbolic, I will say it is one of the best. The best anything, movie, book, TV show, episode, anything. It's just, it is super intense. It's the way it's shot and the way the story is told, and the acting is all top notch. It's like the best of the best. You get the best of writing, you get the best of acting, you get the best. This is like filmmaking, storytelling at the top notch. This is like the top achievement. You can't achieve anything better, in my opinion, than this episode. It is very tragic. It is heartbreaking. It is emotional. It is the most powerful, emotionally wise story ever told, in my opinion. So, and part of the reason why, of course, it pays off so well is because you have 5 years of background. Like, if this was its own movie, you wouldn't be invested as much, but because you know the character so well, and you're invested in the character so well, and everything falls to shit so spectacularly in this episode, is what makes it so amazing. And again, it's the Shakespearean tragedy, where had Jesse and Walt just sat down and communicated properly and got their feelings across, instead of them both like assuming things about the other, this all could have been avoided. And again, Walt was being dumb by involving such a scrupulous character like Jack, and this backfired on him and went to bite him in the ass, because as I said, Jack's heard the coordinates and he knew that's a bit strange. Usually people tell me to go down the I-40 and turn right at the Dairy Queen, but instead you just gave me a set of coordinates. And so he realized that that's where his money was hidden, so he steals all his money. He kills Hank, and that scene when he kills Hank, the filmmaking, the way the Walt is like, the acting, everything about it is like spectacular. And as I said, Walt is so angry at Jesse because he blames Jesse for Hank's death. He blames Jesse for his money getting stolen. He blames him for everything in this movement. As I said, I think Granite State in the time alone, he's starting to realize it was his own fault. But at the moment, he has his want for his character. That is often what he does. He puts the blame on other people. In this case, he's putting the blame solely on Jesse. So he rats Jesse out to Jack so that Jack can kill him. But instead, Jack, uses him to cook meth and tortures him very badly, which is a fate worse than death in some regards, especially since they kill Andrea. And Walt has to just rub salt in the wound. He has to make matters worse and just, by the way, Jesse, I watched Jane die. I could have saved her, but I didn't. What an asshole move. But then the episode only gets more intense from there when he arrives home and he tries to run away with his family and get his family to run away, but they won't come. They're like, what the hell is going on? Where's Hank? And he keeps avoiding the question. And I talked about it in my proper review. It's one of the best shots I've ever seen, where the camera sort of focuses on a counter that has a phone and a knife on it. And so it makes it clear that Skyler could either use the phone to call the police or use the knife to attack Walt. So you had these two possibilities, and she grabs the knife. When most people, I thought she would grab the phone. I think most people think she'd grab the phone, but no, she grabs the knife and goes after Walt. And it was an accumulation of everything where Walt Jr. grabs the phone and calls the police and says, "My dad's attacking us." And it's just the look on Walt's face while this is happening. And of course, out of his anger and his pure desire to be with his family, he's like, well, if I can't be with my son and my wife, then I'll just be with my daughter. So he takes the baby, runs off, and then, of course, it's super intense scene. Skylar running after him. And I'm even glossing over the fact when Marie told Walt Jr. about Walt. Like, that was such an intense scene. But maybe one of the best scenes ever put to film was when Walt's phone call to Skylar, where he knows that the police are listening in, and he purposely makes it, because again, he's had time to think. He calmed down and realized that running away with the baby is not the right thing to do, that the baby needs to be with her mother, and that he was just desperately trying to hold on to his family. He realizes this, and he realizes that he's going to give the baby back and he's going to run away, but before he can do that, he has to try to save Skylar. And so he makes a phone call where he puts on an act to be this badass asshole who's manipulating Skylar. It's like, what do you know about it? You know nothing. And the acting here is probably I would say the best acting I've ever seen ever. Because you can see how much this hurts him to do it. Like, you can see through his performance that this is tearing him up inside, and he doesn't actually mean any of this, but at the same time, he's able to portray, like, this image that the police need of this manipulative asshole that was controlling everything to try to clear Skylar of any wrongdoing. And especially, and the moment where Marie realizes that Hank is dead too, just from hearing Skylar's part of the conversation where she said, "What happened to Hank?" and then seeing the look on Skylar's face after hearing Walt's response, where she starts bawling. Like, you could not ask for a better, more intense scene than this. It's the filmmaking at its absolute best. So. And then also the way it ends, it really leaves you with I think it's the most, like, abusive, but the most powerful bit of storytelling ever. The way it just leaves you with Walt going to the disappearing, driving off, and just cuts the credits as the van drives away. I mean, damn. So, Ozymandias, definitely the best episode of Breaking Bad. Or of anything, for that matter. So that is it for my top 30 best episodes of Breaking Bad. As I said, thanks so much for sitting through this really long video where I blather on for as long as I did. Well, please, if you did watch it to the end, thank you so much. Thanks for supporting my channel just by watching this video. And yeah, if you would like to support me more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, or check out my Patreon and maybe support me there. Very much appreciated if you are able or willing to do so. So much appreciated. Anyway, be sure to check out my channel as I cover many other shows like Star Trek The Expanse, The Outer Limits, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. Thanks a lot for watching.